Mr. Snow, let me ask you one final time. What are the Hunger Games for?
Hanging tree.
It's the things we love most that destroy us.
We interrupt this program to bring you...
All right, everybody, my name is Kevin.
My name's Adam.
And I'm Julie.
And we are The Real Movie Guys, and welcome back to another episode of The Real Review, the series where we review and discuss all your favorite movies. On today's episode, we're stepping back in it, guys. We're taking a look at The Hunger Games, the Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes. Coriolanus Snow mentors and develops feelings of the female district 12 tribute during the 10th annual Hunger Games. Okay, guys, it's been a while. As I alluded to not so slightly in our last review, we took a little bit of a break from Hunger Games. 2015 was the last movie, and we kind of heard nothing about Hunger Games. It was pretty much mute on that point. I think people were kind of turned off by how the movie performed. I think it slightly underperformed. I don't don't think it was a box office bomb or anything like that, but it did underperform. Oh, it did. Oh, well, I guess I'll go with
both.
Yeah, it didn't do great. So we had a break. Then a book came out. I think it was around 2020. Feel free to correct me if I'm wrong. Julie's shaking her head yes with a big old thumbs up there. The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes came out, which I don't know. I'm not a huge fan of prequels. This is a prequels. This is about the story of Coriolanus Snow, our big baddie from the Hunger Games series. And it was supposed to be how he kind of came to power, kind of like a super villain origin story, if you will. And guys, I don't like prequels. I always feel like there's not much you can really do with it. It's really hard to make it interesting because I always feel like you already kind of know what's going to happen. So you have to find a way to subvert my expectations, right? You have to make a way to see like, oh, I don't see it kind of happening that way. Or you have to make it interesting. And it's incredibly difficult. I mean, I don't think people really realize how hard it is to make a compelling prequel story. So the Hunger Games not being that strongly written a material, in my opinion, to begin with, at least as far as a movie perspective, probably, I didn't have much hope for this. And God damn it, don't you know? I watched The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, and I really enjoyed this movie. And I'm going to go out on a limb here and say, shit, this is my favorite one. This was actually, in my opinion, and I have a lot of thoughts on this, I would argue that this is the most complete and best Hunger Games story that's been told, even over the original story that we've seen. I had a really good time with this. I actually liked all the characters. I liked the idea of the Hunger Games. I think less is more is an approach that we're going to talk about in this. But they went back and fixed it. God damn it. They made it interesting. And I had a really, really good time. And I cannot wait to hear what you guys have to say about this, especially coming from me, who was not a fan of the Hunger Games. This kind of made me a fan of the Hunger Games. And I really like this. I cannot wait to talk about this. Adam, what do you think, my friend? I know you saw it the most recent out of all of us here.
This is good. I think that this movie really benefits from, this is like one of those anomalies where it benefits from the actual already existing series, where it doesn't have to do all the setup again.
Right. I agree.
Where of all this universe and this whatnot. So I think it actually works really well.
I do too.
It's quite surprising. I was really caught off guard.
I was too. And I think really just even from the get-go, I was just really intrigued with this, seeing how everything played out. And I think there's just a lot of really well done things. And I don't know if that has to do with just, the author going back and kind of seeing what worked and what didn't work in the original Hunger Games and kind of rearranging it here. But I do think for the most part, and there'll be a discussion too about that, I think the director was able to capture a lot of the things that we kind of wanted from the Hunger Games that I didn't get in the original. I think it's all here in a really interesting package. Julie, how about you? What do you think?
I completely agree. I loved the book. I really enjoyed this movie. Not only, does it benefit from having the pre-existing series, it adds to it in ways that I wasn't expecting. It really, we see the rise of Coriolanus Snow. And then as you're watching this unfold and how it all plays out, you just realize how much of a nerve Katniss really struck with him. And it's on so many different levels. So that was really cool. It brings so much more to their dynamic, which was already a really compelling dynamic between the two of them. And then you get a lot more added background, which I thought was really cool. Excellent Hunger Games themselves. This is, when we talk about missing action, this was probably the most well executed Hunger Games in all of these films.
You know, it's funny you bring up Katniss, because I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't think about Katniss for a single damn moment in this whole movie. I was actually, I didn't care, to be honest. I think Coriolanus Snow was actually a very strong, well-written character, I think, in this movie. Yeah. But there is one problem, and I guess I'll just start with the negative, because I do actually have more positives. You know, well, believe it or not, Kevin's super positive on something. I know, Adam's face, shock Pikachu face. Yeah, I got to tell you, this is one of those movies where, and I don't know, I get why they did what they did, and it's one of those things. So throughout this movie, this movie's divided into 3 chapters, which again, talking about tropes I don't like chapter tropes within movies. I don't find it interesting, and I find it unnecessary. Save that for a series or something along those lines. I don't think you need it in a movie. I think the audience can kind of figure out, like, we're moving into the next section of a movie. I don't need you to kind of like explain it to me and shout it out to me. This movie definitely could have benefited from more time, I think. The problem with this movie, and again, I think it is the problem of all the Hunger Games, if it took anything from the other movies, is the pacing. The pacing is a bit of an issue in this movie, where I feel like we're spending some time with some characters, and then we're breakneck pace to the end. And I feel like, especially when we get to the end of this movie, it felt like I got whiplash at one point. It just went so fast, and the turns were so quick. I could have enjoyed a miniseries out of this. I think this movie really would have benefited being a miniseries of, say, 6 episodes. I don't think I would have done more than that. Maybe you could have gotten away with three like elongated episodes, but I think 6 would have worked. You had three parts, 2 episodes apart. I think you really could have had some interesting, character development just shined on a little bit more, because this world is crazy interesting, and I really like the perspective we got here. But we'll save that. But before that, Adam, what did you think? Do you think that's something that could have benefited this movie? Did you have any issues with the pacing?
See, I had originally thought, like, oh, maybe this should have been a 2-parter as well.
And
but
I thought that too, but I think series is a better approach.
That's a much better idea. I like that a lot, because there were some characters that I would have liked, but like they're so, like, the supporting characters in this film were so much like
interesting.
More
interesting. Yeah.
I want to know more about them, and I think give me more background on all of them, and I think a series would have absolutely done that very well.
Right. I think just a little bit more time would have helped. And unfortunately, I don't know how much you could have fixed in this movie specifically without kind of altering the whole plot, because I think they did a good job, right? I don't think you could have really done too much, and I don't really fault them for that. But I think just being a series would have helped. What do you think, Julie? You think the same as well, or?
Yeah, I completely agree. That was the first thing you said to me, I think even in the middle of the movie or at the end.
I'm like, I want more of this.
Yeah. And I completely agree. Like you said, they did the best they could within the time constraints of being a film.
Right.
Of course, me having read the books, there's stuff that got cut out. And I'm not even going to nitpick the stuff that got cut out. I just wish I had more time.
Yeah.
And you mentioned the breakneck speed, and it really does feel that way, especially preparing for the games. At one point we have the bombing, and then the very same night is the interviews, and then the games are the next day, which it's longer in the book, but whatever. But even just watching it from the film perspective, I needed more time between those events to really let certain things set in and have a little bit more impact. So being a mini series, I think, would have benefited this material so much better. But again, I'm very happy with what we got.
And you could have had a lot of fun with, like, playing with some flashbacks. I know it's not a super popular, well, it is a super popular series, but it's kind of mixed. The Last of Us was something we recently talked about here on the channel, and they were able to kind of utilize that to an extent where they were able to go back and show different things that happened previously to characters, or build upon that with flashbacks and utilize that in different ways. And I think this could have benefited from something in that way, because again, everyone is really interesting, and I want to talk about what makes this so interesting, because these are the things that I think work for me. Everyone loves to see a hero become a villain, do we not? I mean, that's the famous Spider-Man quote. Green Goblin said that to Peter Parker Spider-Man on the top of the building and Sam Raimi Spider-Man. I love to see him become the villain. It's true. I think we all find that interesting, and they did a really good job with this. I'm not really familiar with the actor that played Coriolanus, Tom Blythe. I don't know if he's really been around that much, but he did a phenomenal job. I thought he was incredibly likable. I thought his swerve to becoming a bad guy, even though I think it is a little bit breakneck at the end there a little bit, and it could have been fleshed out a little bit better, I still was able to grasp what they were doing with the character, and I really did enjoy it. It kept me compelled the whole time. And the one thing here, and I think Adam, we kind of talked about this earlier on in the series, where we felt like the Hunger Games could have been a little bit more interesting, maybe the setup. Something we didn't talk about was like the mentor to tribute role that was in the initial Hunger Games series. I never really enjoyed that super too much. I don't know how you guys felt about it. Like, it's fine. Like, you had Haymitch was like the trainer for the tributes for District 12, and a past victor ended up being the one that was going to mentor the tributes. This idea, I think, is superiorly better in my opinion, where they have these students that are training to become game makers, and they're in this like school, and this is like their final test. They have to get a tribute to win the Hunger Games, and they have this idea of that. I think that's incredibly more compelling and interesting. What do you think, Adam? I was already hooked. I'm like, who's gonna win? Like, I mean, I know it's a prequel, but I don't necessarily know that Snow's gonna win this, or how the ending was.
Right, and there's a prize on the line too.
Right, and I think that's more interesting.
Yeah, I like that's the world building that I wanted.
Right.
Like, that's so cool. What a cool and unique idea that I just was not expecting. Maybe it's because my expectations were pretty low for the film, but like that, I thought that was really neat. I thought it was such a cool idea.
Right. And I thought that was the same. I was in the same boat as you. I'm like, oh, maybe this is just, I was thinking this was going to be hot garbage. And that's kind of why I'm so like, over the moon with this. But I think it wasn't. I think this is actually a pretty well done movie. And I also I hate to say it, I don't know if I find the poor districts' perspective as interesting as I find the capital's perspective on things way more compelling and way more interesting, seeing how the capital lives and their high society angles. Because we already spent like 4 movies hanging out with the districts and kind of seeing it from that perspective. But I wanted to see kind of how this other supreme society kind of operates and works and see what their perspective is. And I thought that was incredibly more compelling and more interesting. What did you think of that, Adam? I like that perspective a lot more, I think.
Yeah, seeing it from their side, being like, I guess, because the first 4 films, they're pretty much cut and dry, like good versus evil.
Yeah.
But this one, it feels more of like there's a gray area.
Right, and people don't like the Hunger Games. And it's actually one of the top compelling points in the movie of where maybe we shouldn't be having these Hunger Games.
Yeah, I thought it was really neat. And to see it from their perspective, it gives me a whole new light on the entire Hunger Games overall.
Right, and it does a really phenomenal job kind of showing like exploitation in media and stuff like that. And I think that's a really fun symbolism to play with, how like the media just loves to exploit the people any way possible just to kind of garner those ratings. And you could argue, they can't even argue, it is a fact. We still see that in today's media. But again, it just did a really phenomenal job with this. And I think they built up the character of Snow extremely well. And then we're introduced to Lucy Gray. Lucy Gray... Rachel Zegler, I know, hasn't been the most popular actress in the world as of late, especially some of her Snow White comments, and we'll put that aside for now. That's not going to affect whatever's going on with this. I thought she did a good job. I actually liked her more than Katniss. I do think her acting leaves a bit to be desired in some instances. I don't know if she was having maybe a harder time with the accent. That's what I would think. She was trying to have this kind of like Southern, kind of like soft Southern Belle kind of accent going on, and I don't know how well that always came across, especially with her line delivery. I thought maybe that was a little bit weaker, but I can forgive that because I think of the majority of the time, I really liked her chemistry with Snow, and I think they did a good job building that. And her voice is beautiful. She has a phenomenal singing voice, and it kind of does. The movie, like everyone in the movie kind of stops to acknowledge her singing voice. I can kind of believe that. I think they did a good job with that. How about you, Julie? Because I know you read the book, and it's probably harder to cut that across from the book as it is to a movie. You're able to present that a little bit better, I think.
Yeah, it's hard because when you're reading the book, they're just giving you lyrics on a page. and leaving it to your imagination, of course, but she really brings the music to life in this movie, especially that one scene where she's being enveloped by these snakes and she's singing as they're crawling up her and she's glaring into the cameras. Like, it was such a powerful scene.
Yeah, the visual in a couple of these scenes were extremely powerful.
In addition to like the vocal aspects, like it was really well done. So that really endears you to her character.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree. And then, a lot of the other actors, I mean, Peter Dinklage is in this movie. Do I have to really talk about Peter Dinklage too much? He's a phenomenal actor. The man just comes on the scene and he just, outacts everyone in the scene. And he does a really good job, actually, I thought, with Tom Blythe playing Coriolanus. I thought they had actually a really good back and forth, especially when we get that little stinger of them back and forth at the end of this movie. I really enjoyed their like banter back and forth. Like the connection was definitely there. And you could see he's just really elevating him significantly in the scene. And I really did enjoy that. Viola Davis was the one actress I was a little confused with in the beginning. I'll be honest with you. She comes in playing Dr. Volume and Gall, and she's kind of the game maker. She's like the head game maker in this movie. And at first, oh my God, what the hell is this character? She comes on, she's got 2 different color eyes, she's got crazy hair, she's dressed all wild, and she's like acting like a super villain out of another completely different movie. Like everyone's sitting there all serious in the room, and then she just like bursts in and starts like going her lines over the top crazy. And I'm like, what the hell is this movie? But as the movie went on, I kind of liked it. What did you think, Adam? Did it off-put you at first a little bit?
It did, because I was like, oh no, what
right?
are we getting into?
Right.
But yeah, and then I started thinking about, how grandiose and how extravagant, I think this whole universe gets in the future.
Right. So it kind of makes sense.
And I was like, okay, that makes sense. So I liked her character a lot. I think it definitely worked.
Yeah, and again, at first I think it is a little jarring, and most people it probably will be when you see her. You're going to be like, oh my God, is this, what movie am I watching? And then it's like, oh, okay. And then it actually is a lot of fun. And then that kind of turns into the Hunger Games themselves. Now, Adam, again, this is something we talked about too, where the first Hunger Games, we didn't really have that great a time, especially I think a lot of it was more the cinematography was off-putting in those movies, and I really didn't enjoy it that much. I couldn't see what was going on. Catching Fire, I think we all loved Catching Fire. We had a really good time. Like, those were the games. I would even make the argument, though, they didn't feel too much like games at times. It felt more like just like kind of groups hanging out and then, running into traps and stuff like that. I never felt the full weight of the Hunger Games in any of these movies. Maybe the first one alluded to it, but it never really truly gave me that impression. Holy shit, this movie did. And as soon as the games start in this one, where the tributes are just dropped in a small, tiny arena and they're expected to fight each other with the most archaic of weapons. Adam, this is what I wanted. This was fantastic. It wasn't super gory or it was violent. I mean, but it wasn't super gory. It wasn't like an R rating or anything like that. But this is what I wanted to see. This is what I wanted to see the impact of Hunger Games was.
Yeah, get rid of that young adult crap.
This is it.
And just give me that ruthless, this is what I was looking for.
Right.
It was so much more enjoyable. It's amazing how much more extravagant it got between the first films,
right.
And then X amount of years later, and here we are. It's just this is what I was hoping for.
But it's even crazier how we can be so much enjoyed by something so much small scale versus the grander scale that we got later on. I think that's quite compelling as a visual comparison between the two.
Maybe it was in the mystery of I don't know who's going to survive, and it's just going in not knowing anything. I was on the edge of my seat for a while there. And
not even that, every death just felt personal. It felt very I felt like when someone died, I was like, oh, that's really terrible. I felt like in the Hunger Games and the movie, the earlier movies later, but whatever, it's confusing when we talk about them. And the last series of Hunger Games movies, I never really cared when someone died. I was like, oh, okay, that person kind of died. But this movie had some
another
weight.
One.
This one had some weight behind some of the deaths. I really think they actually
These
were able to capture
tributes,
that.
man.
Yeah,
they're fighting for their lives before they even get into the arena.
Yeah, and it's funny too because we talk about how the districts are so poor and there's supposed to be this big divide between the two. I don't know if it just wasn't captured as well maybe in the other series, but this series was able to really capture the difference between the rich society of the capital versus how poorly treated the districts were. This movie was really able to capture that, especially when they're only able to send them water or It's not much water or food was really the only
Water.
thing. Yeah, I mean, and the other ones are sending them weapons, and I guess that was kind of the evolution of the Hunger Games, which they talked about. Snow, and I think that's interesting too, where Snow kind of implements all these changes that make the Hunger Games become what they are later on down the road. But this simple Hunger Games, I think, is just so much more effective. What do you think, Julie?
Yeah, I just love the stark contrast between this is the 10th Hunger Games now compared to what we see in the original series. Because even what we see in this wasn't existing in the previous first through ninth Hunger Games.
Mm-hmm.
The fact that they're literally treated like cattle, like in cattle cars, and then they're dumped in a zoo to be looked at like spectacles.
Yeah.
And then, right, it was Coriolanus's idea to let's send them supplies, but based on how popular they are, people can donate,
which is fun because then you look at even that by stark contrast too, like the interview segments were like kind
yeah,
of a thing,
that
but
just
now
started
we see how it evolved, and like Adam said, it's interesting how this movie benefits from knowing what comes later, and we're seeing it here, kind of the evolution of that. I think that's incredibly interesting.
Right. And you mentioned it earlier too, where not only in the districts but even in the capital, people aren't watching the Hunger Games. They're kind of
they don't care
over
anymore.
it. Yeah. Right. They don't like it anymore. So the fact that the capital, the higher ups in the capital have to think of ways to make it more interesting and more of a spectacle to get people engaged. And it works.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately. So I just love that whole concept of, this very bare bones Hunger Games and trying, the beginnings, you're seeing it become what it eventually will lead to, the grand spectacle.
Yeah, I agree. I think it did a really phenomenal job with that. And again, this movie does a lot of good things like that. One of the other characters I wanted to talk about, I promised I would talk about her in the last video. So Tigress showed up at the end of Mockingjay Part 2, and I thought it was just some random cat lady that was at the end of the movie. So apparently she is the cousin of Coriolanus Snow. Adam, was that the connection that you needed to the Hunger Games?
Yeah, I got the moment.
Shit.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I'll give the movie this credit, right? I think any of the Hunger Game references that to come later on are actually done pretty tastefully, in my opinion. That's like the one where I'm like, oh, okay, I don't know why you did that, but okay, sure, that's fine. But I think a lot of the references that are made in this movie to allude what's going to happen down the timeline of these Hunger Games, I think they're actually done pretty well. A lot of it has to come down to the music with the hanging tree would become this kind of hymn for the rebellion that would ultimately destroy Snow, and that's kind of what he hears at the end of the movie too. I think that's very interesting. Lucy Gray alluding to, oh, look, here's this weed. Oh, it's Katniss. I'm like, oh, I mean, it's fine. I get it. It's a little corny, a little cheesy, but it's kind of fun too, but it's not too much. Sometimes when a movie does too much, like Lucy Gray, I don't know if there's an argument here, but I don't think she's related technically to anybody. She's not like Katniss's grandma or something weird. You know what I mean? It's not one of those kind of connections. It's just kind of the story organically continues on, even though I know some YouTubers out there probably really want her to be super related to Katniss in some way. I don't think that was the case here, and it does a good job with that. I think it plays its references close to the chest, and this movie does what it should do, and it focuses on making this story the strongest story it needs to be, and I think that's where it's incredibly successful. How about, Adam, what did you think as far as any other weaknesses with this movie? One thing I know we did talk about was some of the breakneck speed. Now, did you like the idea of kind of the 3-chapter separation? Is that something you maybe wish they didn't do? Because I think after the Hunger Games kind of conclude, this movie kind of shifts into another completely different movie. That's kind of where it started to just not lose me completely, but started to kind of, I don't know, maybe I lost a little bit of interest after that part.
Yeah, I think that because I think it was I think maybe it was with part 1 or something. We had mentioned where all the action happened in the middle of the film, and then after that it kind of trickled off again. It's kind of the same idea for me. It's I don't know. I'm expecting the Hunger Games when I go into it, and it's kind of a build up to the Hunger Games. But once that happens, I'm like, all right, well, now what?
And I guess that's a problem with pacing, though, right? Because we
Right.
get to a point
Yeah.
where the Hunger Games is like this big buildup, and then it's over, and then we still have another hour and whatever left of this movie that we have to tell, and it's kind of like the punishment of Snow, and ultimately how he evolves to become the bad guy. Luckily for them, I think they did a good job making me interested in what he was going to do to get out of this situation. But again, I think, like we said earlier, I think if this was a series, that would have been easily fixed, that problem.
Yeah.
Hands
Agreed.
down. I don't think that would have been so much of an issue. Because by the time we get to the end of this movie, Coriolanus does become the bad guy we all know and love by the end of this movie. He has a really, really corny supervillain dress-up scene at the end of this movie where he puts on a purple suit and he puts on the gloves and he's like, ho ho, I'm evil now. Ho ho. I was like, all right, fine. I guess, I could forgive it. I kind of like stuff like that. I'm kind of into like the corny villain angles in this movie. But again, I think also I do like the way the movie kind of wrapped up its story. It didn't tread too much. I think it just kind of got straight to the point. He's going to be a bad guy now, and that's what we're going to get. And kind of the left is left to the imagination. How about you, Julie? What did you think of that?
Oh, I love the end. I love his final interaction with Peter Dinklage's character, Dean Highbottom.
Yeah, that was a strong moment, which I kind of wish we got a little bit more out of with their interactions. Because the reveal at the end, which I guess this is spoilers. The weird thing too, if you watch the trailer for this movie, it spoils a lot of this movie. There's really not much to the imagination as to what's going to happen. I mean, you could argue it's a prequel. Snow's gonna become the bad guy, but in this movie specifically, you find out that Snow's father was one of the creators of the Hunger Games. I thought that was an interesting little tidbit. I just wish I got to see kind of a little bit more back and forth with their characters a little bit, because again, they're really good when they share the screen together.
Right. So it's so powerful. I love the ending. I agree with you. The heel turn is very kind of rushed. And that's just something it's hard to do in the movie, because in the books we get his internal monologue throughout the entire
That is an
movie.
interesting choice you brought up to me, where you said the books it's all from his perspective, right? It's all internal.
Right.
Okay.
So how he feels about everything. And they do their best to convey it. But it starts to stew a lot earlier in the movie, the book, where in the movie you just kind of feel it come to this quick conclusion, where you're like, whoa, what the heck?
Yeah, and let's just talk for a quick sec about that, because that's one of the main, I guess that would be another main issue with me, is unfortunately it just feels really fast. He kills the two people in the town. I'm not going to go into all the details. He's blamed for a crime and he thinks he can't get away with it, so he runs away with Lucy Gray and they escape into the forest. And there's these guns that are kind of tying him to the whole murder plot. If they find these guns, his life's going to be ruined, so he might as well just run away, and he doesn't know where they are. They could be found at any moment. And then he finds out that these guns are in this little shack, and he just kind of discovers them. He's like, oh, here are the guns, Lucy. And she's like, oh yeah, there they are. He's like, and he just literally decides right then and there, I'm going to kill you. And it's like, what the fuck? What happened?
Well, not, yeah.
In the movie, I know the book has a whole different subtext to it, but Adam, is that how you that's kind of how I interpreted that almost, where it's like, instead of just being like, oh, why don't we try and work this out? Maybe we can go together, figure something out. It's like, no, I'm just going to fucking kill you. And I'm going to get out of here. Out of nowhere, it felt like to me.
Yeah, it's kind of, I guess, for them, it's like, whoa, right place, right time. I'm here.
It just felt so out of left field, because they were supposedly in love, and I really kind of believe that a little more so than I did Peeta and Katniss. And if we're equating it to other Hunger Games, I felt the relationship was kind of genuine in this one. And then to be like, oh, I'm just gonna kill you now. It's like, oh, okay.
Yeah, I was definitely.
Well, she drops that line. Yeah, where she's like, oh, I'm just the last loose end or something.
Yeah, that's like, oh,
and it's
okay.
Yeah, I was way more attached to their relationship, but just to end like that, I was like, oh, damn, something. Right. I must have missed something somewhere.
I know, and I feel like that's, again, and we're talking about how this could have been, needed more time in the oven, or just needed to be longer in a lot of aspects, where I think we could have had that relationship, because I know, Julie, you mentioned that there are other scenes that kind of hint at Snow's kind of, this dark side of Snow, and I feel like the movie's almost afraid to give us the dark side. Did anybody else get that feeling in the movie, where I mean, I feel like they wanted to make him so much the good guy, but by doing that, it kind of negated him becoming the bad guy to some extent. It felt less justified by the time we get to the end of the movie, where I wanted some more like selfish scenes. Like, I mean, yeah, you can interpret everything he did is for himself and is selfish, but I wanted to see a little more of the harshness of it, because that's kind of what I think of when I see Snow, is this harsh, vile human who's, I wouldn't kill kids unless there was a reason to kill kids kind of thing. Like, that's the character I think of, and that's almost felt like the bite was missing out of the snake in this movie.
And there's so much of that too, where he, of course, initially like struggles with his feelings towards Lucy Gray because he's capital and she's district. And then there's this weird possessiveness he has over her, and the intense jealousy, because at the end of the day, he just sees her as an object. So it makes it easier to see that heel turn in the book, because you already know their love isn't as pure as he wants it to be and as imagining it to be.
Right. And the movie doesn't come across that way.
Right.
That's the
problem.
problem.
Again, it's hard to do that. I don't know. And then I'm curious, this is still going into spoilers, how the two of you interpret the fate of Lucy Gray by the end of this movie.
That's a good
question. What do you think happens to her?
I feel like she got away. I don't know how you feel, Adam. I feel like, because we don't see a body or anything like that, so I'm not left to believe that she was murdered. I would think, I don't know. That's kind of how I look at it. I think in the book it's left undeterred. Is it left?
It's very. I mean, yeah. I personally believe that she got away, but in the book, it's very unclear, because he's in a heavily wooded area and he hears her voice. He doesn't see her, and he shoots like crazy in that direction.
Right. In the movie, I felt like they didn't do that. Well, first off, what do you think, Adam? What do you think of the fate of Lucy?
I mean, I guess I just kind of figured that she got away too, but now I'm rethinking that. Is that possible that she could have gone away? Where would she have gone though?
Well, that's the question. I mean, based off the movie, I would 100% think she got away.
Yeah, I feel like the movie didn't leave me. I mean, I know you're saying in the book it's more ambiguous, and I think I kind of like that a little bit more if it was left more ambiguous.
Yeah.
Even if they did a shot of her, like say there's a shot of her just running. We see her running in the woods, right? And from behind, and we see him like just pull up the gun, and then you hear the gun firing, and you just see it from his perspective, the gun firing, and then it cuts to black. We don't know.
And then go back to the Capitol. Right.
Like that would have been more interesting to me, I think. Because in this movie, I think they kind of pretty much say she gets away. I have no reason to believe she didn't.
That's how I would.
Because we see her trip, right, towards the end. She trips and falls. And you're like, which is kind of, I kind of laughed a little bit when that happened. I don't know why. I just like chuckled. She like trips off. She's like, and then he like goes around, and then she's like missing, and there's a bunch of like dirt kicked up, and he just starts shooting in the air at all the mockingjays, kind of mimicking the voice, which I thought was kind of cool. But that was really the end. I didn't leave me to like this kind of, whether or not she was alive or not. I just assumed she was. But that's interesting perspective.
Is there more coming? Do we know? Like, is there another book happening at some point, or something?
So what I saw, they interviewed the director of this movie, who ironically is the director. Francis Lawrence was the director of all the other Hunger Games movies. So good for you, dude.
Except for the first one.
But good for you, man. You kind of got you got your stride finally. It took you how many movies to get there, but you finally did it. But he was interviewed, and they asked him what he thought about more movies, and he said, really, it's up to the writer, Suzanne Collins. If she doesn't want to write anymore, there's no more. That's kind of what they're going on right now. So unless she decides to write another story, there's no plans for there to be a continuation, which I think is good. There shouldn't be a continuation of the story. I think the story is very finite. It has everything I needed. I wouldn't mind another story like this in the Hunger Games universe. I know Julie brought up a couple times, like Haymitch supposedly has a very interesting, like Hunger Games, like his Hunger Games and story could be very interesting to see. And
he's
stuff like that.
He was in the 50th Quarter Quell. So the Quarter Quells always have like really, different rules where, Katniss's Quarter Quells returning victors. So Haymitch's is double the tributes. So they're fighting 48 people in the arena. And I think the arena, I just watched a video about it recently too. Like a lot of the stuff in the arena itself is poisonous.
Oh, see, but that could be interesting. I think this is what I wanted, though. Ultimately, at the end of the day, this is what I was looking for out of Hunger Games. I think it finally delivered on that promise of being this really interesting story. But last thing before we wrap up, a lot of these movies and stories, I think, had a lot of this young adult symbolism in them, which I think was a detriment to the series. Now, Adam, do you felt like a lot of it was pulled away finally, and this was kind of what you wanted out of Hunger Games? Because I kind of got that vibe. I know there was the love story still with Lucy Gray, but it does feel more adult. It doesn't feel so much will they, won't they. It actually feels like a competent story for once, and not this like young adult force-fed story that I'm getting.
Yeah, it's weird. It's like the Hunger Games grew up with the young adults that they were trying to cater to.
Right. And it went, and it's funny, and they did it, and they did it in a prequel. They went backwards and grew up.
Yeah, right. No, I think it worked. I like I said originally, I liked this movie a lot. I think because of them getting rid of some of those tropes, that it definitely was more successful.
Yeah, and I always like the whole and for the sci-fi aspect of it. I know the sci-fi was always something we kind of were hinted at, like in the later Hunger Games movies. This one really captured that funny, like old timey, like sci-fi kind of, like almost like a Fallout. Adam, I know that would be something you kind of saw. Did you kind of see that throughout this movie? Like we all like the TV screens and all that. I like that kind of setting.
Cool aesthetic.
Yeah, this definitely felt more dystopian than the originals did. I guess in the originals it was more of just this, all I had was my blinders on with this universe, but this one, you can tell that it was more dystopian than anything.
Right, and I think it really is that perspective of seeing it from the top and looking down to the bottom. And I know, interpret that as you will. I think that's a more interesting perspective, and they were able to do more with it. So maybe that was one of the strengths that could have been something that should have been done from the beginning. I don't know, but it worked incredibly well here. And I don't think you have to watch the other Hunger Games to enjoy this movie. I think you can make the argument that this one stands alone. I mean, it's fine if you know the references and you know everything that's happening, but I think, Adam, do you think it gives enough for the audience to enjoy this movie without it?
I was going to say, I might actually, this would be like the movie that I would rewatch first over the other Hunger Games.
Right.
I don't even know if I would even watch the other ones, especially now that I've seen them once.
Yeah.
Like this would probably be the peak at this point.
I think this is my go-to one. I would think this would be the one if someone was like, "Oh, I'm interested in Hunger Games," like, "Hey, you should check this out. I think you're gonna have a good time with this one." I think this is the one for me, and I agree. What do you think about that, Julie?
No, I mean, it's a really strong story. It's this really strong standalone story, which makes it definitely, more appealing, where you're like, okay, I'm just going to throw on this one movie, as opposed to like, okay, now I have to watch 4 movies, it can stand alone. I think you get a better appreciation if you know the original material.
I mean, that's enriching regardless. I think there's an argument. I mean, that's like watching like the Star Wars prequels and not watching
exactly
the original trilogy. It's kind of like that in some ways. Maybe not as forced, but I think this is just so much more enjoyable for me. I had a really good time with this, and I think I'm ready to put a big number on this one, guys. I'm gonna give The Hunger Games: The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes an 8.9 out of 10.
Good luck with that poor little songbird. Where is she? It's a mystery. And mysteries have a way of driving people mad.
I had a phenomenal time with this movie. Unfortunately, though, I got to nick it a little bit, really. And it's not a 9, just because I think it really should have been a series. And it's funny how we go from one where, oh, these movies are too long. Oh, I hate these movies too. This should have been longer. I would have had so much more of a good time. But I'm not going to say a movie. I don't think the movie would have been an answer for this. I think a 6-episode miniseries would have served this incredibly well, just to flesh out these already well-written characters, because I can't knock it too much, because I did have a good time with what they gave me here. And I understand that I'm taking into consideration, the limitations of making a movie, making it enjoyable to all the masses. Even if I think this movie's a little bit, it's just too late. I mean, 2015 was a long time ago as far as cinema standards. And now to put out a sequel in 2023, or a prequel in 2023 to an old series at this point, I don't know. I don't know how much this is going to really capture the imagination of a lot of the audiences that it initially had, which is unfortunate, because I think there's a lot to be had here. I think you're going to have a really good time with this movie. Go into it with just, kind of forgetting the rest of the Hunger Games, and I think this will reward you. You have some really interesting, compelling characters, some really great costume design we didn't even get to. I think a lot of the design for this movie, On a Limitation, was incredibly well. A setting I like, a Hunger Games that actually matters, and even if the story at the end is a little bit of a whiplash and my neck's still kind of sore from it. I still think it's a good time. I still really did enjoy it. And I just love seeing a good guy become a villain. I think that's incredibly interesting. Adam, how about you? What'd you think of this one?
I'm going to give The Hunger Games, The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes an 8.8 out of 10.
3, 2, 1.
So same ballpark as you.
Yeah, I agree.
I liked it a lot. I really did, and it caught me off guard. I think it was just the breakneck speed of some things, and
Yeah.
it only left me wanting more information on these characters, unfortunately. So that's definitely where it's going to knock it down a few points for me. But I mean, overall, I had a great time with it. I loved seeing this. The Hunger Games in this movie was way more entertaining, and it was like the characters and just the setting is just, I don't know, it seems much more compelling, especially for it being a standalone film.
Yeah, it's just this again. This is kind of what I wanted out of the original Hunger Games. I mean, and I know what they gave us is what they gave us, but this is what I wanted. I really wish I had this, and this is going to be my go-to. I think going on in the future, I'll definitely be talking about this and recommending it. Julie, how about you? What do you think?
I'm going to give The Hunger Games, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, a 9 out of 10.
We're live! Smile. It's why we have teeth.
I was really apprehensive at first with this movie. I had a lot of high hopes, but you always get nervous when an adaptation comes to life. But it was very, very successful. All of the actors, I think, did a wonderful job bringing the characters to life. I love going back to Pan Am, especially the capital. There was so much rich world building, great storytelling. I think that, like you said, would only have benefited maybe from being in a mini series where we could really do some deep dives into these characters and the story. But I was so happy to be back. It makes me want more. I don't know if we'll get more, but we'll see.
Yeah, the one thing I didn't talk about is I love how Coriolanus. Corey. Was it Corio? That was a terrible nickname. I love how he looks like Slim Shady by the end of this movie.
I know.
Anyone else kind of like, I was like cracking up.
Yeah, there's a lot of TikToks about him.
With Corio, like please stand up, at the end of this movie. I was really cracking
Real
up.
Corio's dead.
Yeah, I thought that was kind of funny. But yeah, I think this is a good movie. I just, again, I wish it just came a little bit sooner. If it just came out, maybe a couple of years after the last one, but there's a reason for everything to happen, right? This is one of the stronger series, and I don't know. I'm curious to see how this movie does within the zeitgeist of, the fan base and whatnot. I wonder what their takes are on it, because I had a good time. Maybe it's just because I'm not super ingrained in the Hunger Games novels and the stories, but I think this is enjoyable. I think this is a fun movie. Comes highly recommended, but most importantly, let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Did you enjoy The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes? A really long title. I thankfully don't have to say anymore. Did you guys love it? Did you hate it? Do you think a mini-series? What is your ideas for interpreting this? Would you have wanted multiple movies? Would you have wanted a mini-series? There's a couple ways you could have gone about it. I just kind of laid out maybe my idea for something that I think would have helped fleshed out the story just a little bit more, because again, there's a lot of really good stuff here, and I would have wanted more time. And it's ironic. I was really happy my time was over, but now I kind of want to go back in. But again, let us know what you guys think. But thank you for joining us for this episode of The Real Review. My name's Kevin. That's Adam and Julie. We are your real movie guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. We'll catch you next time.
If you guys like what you've seen here today, consider giving this video a like and leaving your thoughts in the comments below. If you want to stay up to date with everything Real Movie Guys related, make sure to hit that subscribe button and check us out on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. And don't forget, all you audio listeners at home, we are available on many podcasting platforms. Just search The Real Movie Guys, you should pop right up. Thank you again all so much for joining us on this episode of The Real Review. We are The Real Movie Guys. Real guys, real movies, real thoughts. Catch you next time.